Whether you're a diehard sports fan, a hopeless romantic, or a comedy aficionado, the Xfinity 10G network was made for streaming it all. Worry less about buffering when streaming your favorite shows, movies, or live sports, and enjoy a better way to watch. Xfinity gives you a reliable connection for streaming, plus all the entertainment you love all in one place. Fear not, because now you can finally sit back, relax, and stream your favorite entertainment and sports like never before with the Xfinity 10G network.
Want the same expert advice you get from the pros in the store while shopping online at DiscountTire.com? Meet Treadwell, your personal online tire guide that matches you with the perfect tire for your vehicle. Get your best match in 1 minute or less with Treadwell by Discount Tire.
To get the Crime Writers on After Show right now, go to patreon.com/partners in crime media.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And this week, police had 2 suspects in a young woman's murder. Did their interpretation of DNA lead them to the wrong one? We'll talk about the new podcast, Suspect. Then, the faithful flock to a tiny Brazilian village to seek a spiritual healer. Now, they say his healing methods were really sexual assault. We'll review John of God from Netflix. Join me to get that done and more is true crime author, TV journalist, and host of the These Are Their Stories podcast, my husband, true crime co-author, and love of my life, Kevin Flynn. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, Rebecca.
Also with us is private investigator, certified pet detective, resident cat lady, and author of the best-selling Dead on Deadline, Laura Bricker. Hello, Laura.
Hello, Rebecca. So I will probably be the best-selling author at Water Street Bookstore for one more week until Joe Hill's next book comes out, but I am riding the wave.
Listen, we use best-selling loosely on the show, but in your case, it actually means something.
Yeah.
So let's just ride that wave, shall we?
How about you're the best-selling author whose father isn't also a billion-dollar author, whose coattails you can ride upon.
Let's be real. Your best-sellingness has nothing to do with nepotism. It's all on your own hard work and hustle, right?
I think of you all the time. I'm hustling.
You are. And finally, our captain of woke cynicism, the author of the novels known as the City Trilogy, host of the Strange Arrivals podcast from iHeart, and our very own Patreon Deep Dive Book Club podcast host, Toby Ball. Hello, Toby.
Hey, Rebecca. I'm entity approved.
Oh, good.
Gross.
What?
He's talking about John of God, the thing we're talking about. Ugh.
I know he is. All right. So should we just get started with this week's podcast's first review?
Let's do it.
I think we should. Leading off.
I've seen many people with cancer and terminal illnesses that were cured in the first intervention.
Lean on your right leg, throw your crutches away. Walk a little faster now.
For years, people who were sick or disabled flocked to a small Brazilian village to seek out John of God. He performed spiritual healings, curing the faithful with crude surgeries or a touch of his hands. But John also pulled aside young women and claimed their miracles were to be performed through other techniques.
When I recall it, I don't know what happened. But if I say I don't know what happened, it wouldn't be true.
The Netflix Brazilian import, John of God, The Crimes of a Spiritual Healer, explores the case of a quasi-religious leader who used his position to assault hundreds of women. The 4-part documentary also shows his rise to power, his witch doctor-like methods, and his victims' search for justice. Spoiler alert, we are going to be talking about plot points from John of God, The Crimes of a Spiritual Healer. So if you want to remain spoiler-free, go to the estimated time code in our show notes to hear our thumbs up or thumbs down reviews. Now, I will say, all 3 of you have the same first bullet point in your notes. And if I were to write notes with bullet points, I would also have the same. So I think we can all agree this was way too long. Okay?
4 episodes was still way too long.
I don't think we need to have a whole long discussion about how this was too long. Too long, too long, too long, too long. Okay, we're done talking about that, right?
And 4 episodes is not very long.
No.
Actually.
Way too long, so let's just move on, shall we? We don't need to talk about the fact that it was too long. Now, Kevin, I do want to talk about the fact that this is in Portuguese. Mm-hmm. And typically, we prefer to watch things that are in foreign languages in the foreign language with subtitles.
I'll say that I prefer crime drama.
Yes.
I'd rather hear the actors in their native language because it's part of their performance that I get something out of. But in a documentary like this, I'm okay with. And there are people who don't like to read or have trouble reading, and that's fine. You got to do you.
But even in documentaries, we usually watch it in the language in which it's made. But we chose to not do it that way this time, and that decision was a good one here. So, Laura, I prefer usually to watch it in language in which it was made. But even though this was a documentary, I sent you a note and I was like, I am okay watching it with the English voiceover. I found it easier. I found it more digestible. And I forgave myself for it. Did you also watch it with English voiceover, Laura?
Well, I tried. I actually went back and forth. So first I started in the Brazilian Portuguese and I was like, God, this is dry. It seemed very repetitive. So I said, well, maybe I'll follow Rebecca's advice and I'll do the English subtitles with the dubbing. I did that for 2 episodes, but it was also hard because you were also hearing the Portuguese behind the English. And then I was like, is this just sucking? So then I switched back to the And I think, honestly, what you guys did was the right decision. But I just think overall, the narrative structure sort of meandered in a way that it made it difficult to watch for me, no matter what language I was watching it in.
Now, Kevin, one of the things that really fascinated me, and I wanted more of it but didn't get it, was the actual healing part of this.
Right.
Because we did see some kind of incredible, probably charlatan footage of things like shoving a pair of scissors up someone's nose and pulling out maybe what looked like a tumor, and suddenly they were fine. And
yeah, look, we have seen this kind of story before. The powerful man is actually a sexual predator and using his influence to do his evil deeds. And so what is different about this tale? Well, the different part is the spiritual healer part, right? And I don't think we got enough of that. We certainly didn't get any sort of critical investigation of what he was actually doing. The hell with putting a clamp in somebody's nose and then all of a sudden their brain cancer's gone.
Turning it 21 times.
And
then they go in the back and puke out something that looks like a piece of steak.
Or the woman whose husband had some sort of weird surgery on his chest.
Oh my God, with a rusty chainsaw.
So that's really interesting, right? I mean, that's something the Jeffrey Epstein documentary doesn't have. So not only do we want to know more about that, is he not only a sexual predator, but he's also a con man? We didn't get any of that part.
Yes.
Yes.
He's everything.
But I really would like to have known, okay, did the brain tumor how did that go away? Did he never have it in the first place? Or, I don't know. It's just, that was something that's really different about this story. And I'm like, I think there was an opportunity to explore that and some other things.
Toby, I want to hear your take on that. Because a lot of these victims, we are challenged to believe them. I don't want to say challenged to believe them because I do believe them that they were sexually assaulted by this guy, right? But we are also asked to believe them by the filmmakers that he also cured my breast cancer and he also cured my husband's heart attack by giving him a heart transplant with a rusty chainsaw or putting a pair of scissors up my nose and turning them 21 times and pulling out my brain tumor. We're supposed to believe both things. And I do not want to discount the sexual assault allegations in any way because a lot of them are on film and they're clearly fucking true. What are we supposed to make in this film of these faith healing claims that were made at this place that I swear to God looks like a goddamn arcade at the Hampton Beach goddamn boardwalk.
It looks like a very sad dojo. Everybody's in white. There's weird posters on the wall.
The posters are weird.
What are we supposed to make of these faith healing claims? Toby, I know you know a lot about cult stuff and faith healing stuff. What are we supposed to make of these claims? Because they go completely unchallenged in this documentary.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know much about him in particular, but I do know that, I mean, there's lots of people who do this kind of thing, right? Who claim to be faith healers, and you can watch them on TV here. I think like Benny Hinn might have been one of them. But when people look at these claims of healing, they're not doing like 2-year follow-ups to see if the cancer was really gone, or was it just the effect of, I went and saw this guy and I've got a new attitude, so I don't feel as sick as I did. My sense is, again, I'm not sure, but it seemed, and it kind of comes up a little bit with one of the women who's talking about her encounter with him, is that he hypnotizes people. And I think that's probably part of what happens, is that the setting in which people interact with him is that you're in these huge crowds and it's hot and you're waiting all this time and the excitement's building and you get in this big line and all this stuff is happening around you. People in front of you are being cured of things. So I think by the time you get up there, you're in highly suggestible. And my sense is that he can pretty quickly hypnotize people and then, shove stuff up their nose or take away their cane, and they'll walk away under hypnosis because they're not feeling the pain that you would normally feel. And I'm not sure if like a week from now, that guy's still like walking around like he's a spry teenager.
He kept his cane, so how's the guy gonna walk anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess they carry him to the bus and then like push him out the door when they get
wakes
back
up,
to
where's my
Rio
cane?
Or whatever. I don't know what book you have to get out of the library to learn how to do these tricks, but Jim Jones, like in the early days, was doing a similar thing where he would say that he was getting people's cancer, and it would be like a raw chicken liver that he'd keep under his tongue, and he'd spit it out and be like, I just pulled the cancer out of you.
So you're saying that part's all fake?
I thought it was totally true.
So what do you think it's totally true, Laura? You think that other doctors who say you used to have cancer and didn't anymore?
Hey man, Oprah vouches for him, so.
Well, we need to fucking talk about this because, listen, our culture loves Oprah, is obsessed with Oprah. Harry and Meghan love Oprah. Oprah is the one who shows up every time there's an important interview. I know that Oprah is like adjacent to a lot of things our culture loves, but I think we have learned on this podcast and through many other podcasts and documentaries we have watched that Oprah is adjacent to a lot of things that are bananas. Oprah is adjacent to Scientology. Oprah is adjacent to this. Oprah is adjacent to Dr. Oz. Oprah is adjacent to lots of stuff. So let's listen to a little clip of Oprah in this documentary.
It was so strong that I had to sit down because I thought I was going to pass out.
Thoughts, Kevin?
Yeah, well, first we see Oprah show up, but there's never any context as to why she's there or what the benefits are. We see later on cover of Oprah magazine, like, was there a feature? Did that help get the word out? And now he made $1 billion more. It was weird.
You get a faith healing, and you get a faith healing, and you get a faith healing.
Oprah is not an insignificant cameo, especially in a true crime thing. So, again, what the hell was that all about? I mean, it might have been really interesting, or it might have been nothing, but at least tell us.
We needed some context.
Absolutely.
What did you think, Lara?
No, I think we absolutely needed some context because, I see her come in and I'm like, oh boy, what is she doing? Just like a special program there? Is she going to them like him for her own healing? And the last time that we saw her somewhere, it was that awful sweat lodge case.
Yes.
So I'm kind of, I wanted a little bit of context as to why she was there and sort of how she fit into the picture other than this sort of like adjacent image that we saw of her.
Listen, Oprah is a seeker. Like that is her brand. Her brand
she was part
is
of The Secret too, right?
Yes. Her brand is being the seeker of seekers. She is the person who brought The Secret to the forefront. She's the person who sort of brought He's Not That Into You to the forefront. She's the person who brought like Dr. Phil to the forefront. She's the person who brought the whole seeking something to the forefront of regular person, non-hippie, middle-class culture. Like that is what Oprah is all about. And a lot of it is fine and affirming, but I'm like, a lot of it is also fucking bananas. Toby, in the aggregate, Oprah Winfrey hero or harmful? Like in the aggregate, I'm just curious. Just in your experience in this podcast, I'm assuming, Toby, because I know you probably did not watch Oprah Winfrey at 4:00 every day after General Hospital.
Did not watch a whole lot of that, no.
So in the aggregate, not being an Oprah Winfrey viewer at 4:00 every day after General Hospital, like you probably weren't, what do you think? Helpful or harmful in the aggregate? What are you thinking at this point as a 6-year alumni of this podcast?
For an American, I'm probably in the bottom 2% about knowing anything about Oprah Winfrey. So I assume that she must be in the aggregate super positive because everybody loves her so much. I feel as though she has enough money to pay people who are better at vetting these people who she is giving these tacit endorsements to. Because, you find out later that there's been at least one sexual assault claim that's been laid on him by a teenager years ago, that it seemed like that one journalist was able to do in a quick Google word search and find it. So how many guests has she had and how many things has she explored? And you just figure there's going to be some percentage that are going to turn out to be not very savory. And I don't know what percentage it is, but as far as her popping up on Crime Writers On things that we review, she's batting 1,000 and making bad choices. So
I feel like Oprah would 100% do ayahuasca. Don't you feel like that's 100% go on that journey in the
go to Peru and go to find a medicine man and
100
vomit for 8 hours.
I would like to go on a shaman medicine man quest.
Listen,
get me to a sweat lodge.
I'm not saying I would say no to Oprah's invitation to Santa Barbara to have me change her mind and invite me to lunch with Harry and Meghan. I would 100% go to that. That being said, I would have a lot of questions.
I've got some questions.
So, Kevin, there is a narrative climax of this documentary, and that is the arrest of John. I mean, there's a lot that happens. We see a lot, by the way, many, many, many shots of John's weird house with the weird door and a lot of hose shots.
You have to see the documentary to get this. But every time they talk about his special room, it looks like a gas station bathroom from the outside with 2 different garden hoses, one on either wall. Why do you need 2 spigots 90 degrees apart from one another?
All I'm saying, that is not a detail you should be focusing on in a documentary about hundreds of sexual assaults.
I know.
I do not want to take away. And by the way, this is a fault of the film, and it's not your fault, Kevin. I am saying this is a fault of the film. We have all of these women telling these terrible stories, and this thing is put together in such a way that both Kevin and I, on multiple occasions, made comments about the number of garden hoses outside this man's house. So anyway, the climax of the film is he is finally arrested.
Oh, I thought you were going to say when he took his hand out and said it was ectoplasm.
Oh my fucking God. Oh my.
Like in Ghostbusters?
God damn it. The details. I will say the one downside of watching this with the English translations, the translations were not great. The names of the charities that were established.
Justice, what is it? Justice has skirt?
Justice has skirt. I know that was not accurate. Not great. That being said, so there was this climax of the film where he was arrested, and you kind of think oh, great. But then
it's almost over.
No, but then there's this long.
It's another 50 minutes of
Yes, and then it's I almost feel like the women were done an injustice by the way the story was put together. You know what I mean?
I agree. There's 2 points that you made there. One is that, that seemed to end too soon for the balance of this story, which is why maybe it could have been 2 episodes or one really big documentary or whatever. To end it that soon into the 4th episode leaves with a lot of, okay, well, now what? And I guess there is, still, there was a lot of legal machinations after that. Look, I will say that I was really, I don't want to say surprised, I was really moved by the stories of these victims.
Yeah.
Even though, I think they sometimes, really, literally the language stuff doesn't translate well, but it came across really articulate.
They're very candid.
Candid. Yeah. I'm trying to find the right word here. They were better at expressing it than I am right now. But I thought the way that they told their stories was really powerful. The last thing that I'll say is that at the very end, we find out that John has been released on home arrest for the next 63 years or whatever. But some of the people made a comment about how it was because of COVID. And they were all stuck at home.
Mm-hmm.
And so they felt like they were on house arrest too, and there was no difference. And I was like, yeah, man, it's like if the justice system doesn't fuck you, I guess life does.
Right.
You know? So you just can't win.
Yeah. Now, Toby, you made a comment when we talked about the Harvey Weinstein case about whether or not, he was abusing women because he was a huge Hollywood filmmaker, or whether or not he became a Hollywood filmmaker so he could abuse women. Are you drawing a parallel here also with the faith healing thing? Like with this guy, did he put himself in this position so he could have more access? Are you thinking that here?
I think that's a possibility. It's either that or it's just like that's his con, I think. Yeah, I mean, they don't really try and answer that question, I don't think. He seems like he's sketchy from the start, right?
He's gross.
Mean, when they talk to his friends growing up, I mean, it's kind of, it doesn't look like his trajectory is going to be that great. They have these little snippets of film where you can see him walking through a crowd and there's clearly like, there'll be like an attractive woman in the crowd and you can see kind of the gravitational pull that woman will have to him, his attention, and it's chilling. I mean, it's just damning to see it again and again and again. It's like, once you start looking for it, I can't imagine like actually being in the room and seeing this, like just watching from a TV, you can see it. So,
yeah.
And just loosening their pants, going through their waistband and just,
This guy has the closest thing to predator face of anything I can possibly imagine. Like once you see him, and Laura, I will say the one scene that really like put me back in my chair was you see that his daughter doing that radio interview, and I think his daughter is about to defend him on the radio show, and she's like, yeah, my dad started molesting me when I was 8. And I was like, oh my God. Like, there's not a single person who knows this guy who isn't immediately like, except for Oprah, who isn't immediately
Well, and his volunteers.
Yes.
I mean, I think his volunteers kind of stick up for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does have this sort of circle, like these protectors around him that continue to defend him.
Sounds
and shield
familiar,
him.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was thinking as I was watching it. And I definitely was having a lot of rage walking after thinking about this guy because he's somebody I would definitely like to smack a few times.
I mean, I do, like the whole thing kind of seemed like, well, if Harvey Weinstein had grown up in Joyous or whatever, how you pronounce it.
Absolutely.
Like this is probably would have been his thing, right? I mean, he was going to be a big film producer there, so he probably would have found out something else. And this is probably as good as anything.
He would have been pulling breast cancer out through the belly button, just like this guy did.
It's just, it happens.
All right. Well, I think we should do what we do. Let our listeners know, should they check out John of God? It's a 4-part documentary on Netflix. It's in Brazilian Portuguese. Laura Bricker, what do you think? Should people check out this series? Yes or no? Thumbs up or thumbs down for you, Laura Bricker?
I'm going thumbs down. And this has nothing to do with the sympathy, empathy that I feel for the victims in this case. It just has to do with how this story was put together. It was put together in a way that was too long, meandered, like the narrative structure sort of got lost. So the impact that I would have felt from seeing these victims' stories of abuse, of what happened to them, really diminished in the way that this story just went on way too long. I think it would have been fine as 1 or 2 episodes. 4 episodes, unless they had actually plotted it out a little bit better, is just way too long. So save yourself. Just go continue watching Only Murders in the Building.
Toby Ball, what about you? Thumbs up or thumbs down for John of God?
Yeah, I kind of wondered, like, if this was the first thing we'd seen about somebody like this, whether it would have felt different. I mean, it just seemed like the arc was very similar in terms of, powerful man, sexually abusing women. You meet some women who, in like these great acts of courage, are able to stand up and go to the justice system and get some form of justice. Like if this is the first time we'd seen it, would it have seemed different? I also wonder how it hits in Brazil. It might hit a little different in Brazil. I mean, they do talk a little bit about the number of, I think, women who are killed every day or every week in Brazil.
Yeah.
It's freaking horrifying. So I can't give it a thumbs up. It's definitely a thumbs down. I would just be interested, and I know we have some listeners in Brazil, if they've watched it, if maybe it hits somewhat differently there. But yeah, the first episode I was kind of interested in because I think that's really when they focus on the John of God and his whole ministry and stuff, and sort of the weird mixture of Catholicism and this sort of spirit worship type stuff. But then after that, it just really, really bogged down.
Kevin Flynn.
I'm going thumbs down. It's an interesting story. Certainly the breadth of his crimes are terrible. It's hard to say, yeah, there are 300 victims, but there's more to this story that could have been explored. There really is. It's an interesting setup because you have the spiritual healer and there's these other things about money and guns and whatnot that really don't get touched on. So I think Toby kind of summed it up in the right way. If this had been the first time we'd seen it, or maybe in Brazil there are no other documentaries of the same vein, then it might be really revelatory, but this is kind of like stuff that we've seen before and not handled in a way that either matches that or takes it in a new direction and advances the form. So I'm just going to have to say it's a thumbs down.
Yeah, I just think it sucks. I mean, I think these women were totally done a disservice.
So that thumb sucks.
Huge thumbs down. I mean, these women were done a huge disservice by this documentary. I mean, yeah, they got to tell their story in the film, but we were given no context about why this guy had the power to do what he did, which is what would have made their stories, I don't want to say matter more, but which would have made it, given that more impact and made people understand like why their stories should have had more ripples in the pond, if that makes more sense. Like, this guy was very, very, very famous. And I don't think outside of this community and outside of this country, you really understand that. And that's kind of the whole point of this film, right? And you don't really get that. I mean, it's like, Brazilian Catholicism is not explained. Faith healing is not explained. It's not debunked. It's not challenged. It's not explained in any way. You know, even the abuse that he committed is not really explained. It's just sort of like touched on here and there. And then we have all this testimony and then we have all this aftermath. But it's just not put together well. And I don't think the victims were done a service. It's narratively just freaking awful. I'm sorry. Like, I wanted to have it have redeeming qualities, but it just wasn't done well. So, sorry, John of God, got to give you a big fat thumbs down.
Whether you're a diehard sports fan, a hopeless romantic, or a comedy aficionado, the Xfinity 10G network was made for streaming it all. Worry less about buffering when streaming your favorite shows, movies, or live sports, and enjoy a better way to watch. Xfinity gives you a reliable connection for streaming, plus all the entertainment you love all in one place. Fear not, because now you can finally sit back, relax, and stream your favorite entertainment and sports like never before with the Xfinity 10G network.
Want the same expert advice you get from the pros in the store while shopping online at DiscountTire.com? Meet Treadwell, your personal online tire guide that matches you with the perfect tire for your vehicle. Get your best match in 1 minute or less with Treadwell by Discount Tire.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
So, Kevin, here we are in the business section.
No, we're not. We haven't started the music yet.
Okay, should we start it now?
Start it now.
Ba-da-ba-da.
Well, now it's the business section.
We have breaking news in our after show today, right? An exclusive.
Yeah, by now you probably have heard that Netflix will be releasing season 2 of The Tiger King.
And you reached out to someone to find out.
I reached out to Carol Baskin to find out whether or not she'll be partaking and what her thoughts were. And we'll talk about that in the after show.
Her response, her official response, she said was on the record.
I said, you don't have to tell me. You know, you can tell me off the record. And she said, it's on the record. Her answer is no.
And she said on the record, why?
Yeah, we'll talk a little more about what was going on behind
Carol.
that.
Yes.
Because I said I wouldn't be surprised they didn't treat you very well in the first one.
Correct. So we will be talking about that in the Crime Writers on After Show, which is available right now in your Patreon feed. If you're a Patreon member at $5 or more, you get the After Show, correct?
Right. Absolutely. And a bunch of other stuff.
And by the way, you get to be a Patreon member at patreon.com/Partners in Crime Media. So if you only want to join right now to hear that, to get this breaking news, you can just join now and then unjoin later, right? If you want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to encourage people to do that, but if you want to hear just that thing, you can do that, right?
Right. And we're also going to, we wanted to talk about it. I don't know, you thought this was really interesting last week and we didn't get it into the after show.
Oh my God.
Kevin's keyboard tricks.
Kevin's computer tips for old people.
Is it for old people? You mean for us people?
Oh, I'm sorry. Your computer tricks, listen, I know you think they're for everybody, but they're especially good for, we are old people. You know that, right?
Yeah.
I hate to say old people like they're other people. We are old people.
Yeah.
Sorry, I hate to break it to you, but we are actually old people. We're going to about your computer.
Way to bring us all fucking down, Rebecca.
I know.
Thanks, Rebecca.
And by the way, for $6 a month on our Patreon, which by the way is our most popular level, right?
For $1 more.
It's our most popular level, right?
Yes, more, yes.
So for
2 cents a day.
Yes, exactly, yes. For $6 a month on our Patreon, you are bumped up to the level where you get an additional podcast, which is Lara Bricker's Leave It to Bricker podcast.
Yeah.
And what is happening on that? All I know is that when you were editing it this week, you were laughing your ass off. What is happening on Lara Bricker's Leave It to Bricker podcast?
Well, in the latest Leave It to Bricker, Lara talks to her son, Will, who's just starting high school, and is explaining all the different ways she has been able to keep tabs on him through the town of Exeter. And I gotta say, when it came to calling Jeb the barber, I was like, okay, I'm fucking done. This is the most Laura Bricker thing in the world. So anyway, there's much more of that on Patreon.
Are you saying that Lara Bricker stalks her own family?
She doesn't need to. She's plugged in. They should call her the Golden Octopus because she has her tentacles all over that fucking town.
Yeah, she does.
Exeter's basically like East Germany.
Yeah.
Only for Lara, though.
Yeah. You ever see one of those 1960s films with some stranger rolls into town and everybody's looking and word gets around? That could be Exeter, and it could be Lara could be the one who knows somebody just came in with an Idaho license plate. And what are they doing here? Yeah.
Do you know what I learned at Lara's book event?
What?
16,000 people live there. Right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Okay.
That's a lot of people. I mean, I know it's still a relatively small town.
Yeah. But...
Right? So our town is very small. 6,000 people live here,
okay.
right?
If you say so.
Okay, Kevin, how many... I'm going to be honest with you, ask you a question. How many of the 6,000 people in our town do you think you personally know? 8? 10?
I would say maybe 3 or 4 dozen, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Lara Bricker, I swear to God, knows 12,000 of those 16,000 people.
I think that might be true, Rebecca.
And she knows at least 1,000 of those cats.
And I swear to God, all 16,000 of those people know her. 100%.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty incredible. Your tentacles do spread far and wide.
I'm like the overlord of Exeter right now.
So there's a lot going on our Patreon. Of course, we have another one of Toby Ball's book club podcast coming up. There's a lot happening, and we have a Meredith podcast coming up too, right?
We do.
God, we make 4 podcasts. But we make 1 podcast outside the paywall. We make 4 behind it, and you get all 4 of them for $6 a month. We're doing a lot back there, guys.
Yeah, there's over 250 exclusive podcasts that you can get. Only on Patreon.
Sheesh. We're like Netflix for your ears. All right, Kevin, before we move on, do we have any Patreon patron saints of the week this week?
Our Patreon patron saints are Ruth Reedy and Audrey Tarr.
Wow.
Bless you.
They must be nice.
They are. They're saints.
All right.
They're patron saints.
Should we end the business section?
Yeah, shut that music off. I'm sick of it.
Thus ends the business section. Moving on.
While DNA is treated in popular culture like a truth meter, a guilt meter, in reality, DNA evidence has to be interpreted by human beings. Human beings who have biases, prejudices, human beings who make mistakes.
In 2008, the body of software engineer Arpana Janaga was discovered after a rowdy Halloween party in her apartment building. She had been strangled and then doused in bleach, motor oil, and toilet bowl cleaner to destroy DNA evidence. Among the suspects was a convicted sex offender with outstanding warrants and a neighbor who was turned away from the Canadian border hours after the killing.
I'm telling you everything. You're not. I'm telling you. Because the way you're telling us is telling me that you're holding stuff back. Did you kick in her door? No, I didn't kick.
Faced with a whodunit and forensic evidence that couldn't be analyzed by conventional means, authorities ran trace DNA through a software program. Though unable to clear one suspect, police arrested another on the basis of debatable science.
This DNA match on the robe fundamentally altered the course of the case. It undercut the conclusion the investigators might be tempted to reach from the DNA on the motor oil bottle. And it changed everything.
In Suspect from Campside Media and Wondery, host Matthew Scher looks at the investigation into Janaga's death. The podcast series slowly peels back the layers of a case with dubious assumptions, racial bias, and junk science, which likely put the wrong man behind bars. Now, we are going to be talking about plot points for the first 5 episodes for Suspect. So to remain spoiler-free, go to the estimated time code in our show notes to hear our thumbs up or thumbs down reviews. So we should note that all of the episodes for Suspect are available on Wondery Plus and on Amazon Music if you have a subscription.
Which I didn't find out until later, damn it!
But the first 5 episodes are available on all of the apps. Now, we should I think Kevin just tipped our hats. This is a podcast that perhaps you may want to maybe get the episodes for. So, Kevin, we have reviewed a couple of podcasts from Campside. And, of course, we've reviewed a plethora of podcasts from Wondery.
If you told me these two...
Wait, let me just say.
All right.
We have liked, for the most part, their podcast from Campside, but our one criticism has been they have been just a little too much on the sound design side.
Uh-huh.
And, of course, from Wondery, most of our criticism has been like, they're way too much on everything. So, here we are, a collaboration between Campside and Wondery, although I'm guessing Wondery is just a distribution partner.
Right, but if you told me like there was going to be a podcast with both their names on it, I would have thought it would have been 9 hours of theme songs and sound effects.
Yes.
And it's not, it's very restrained, and I think that's because, at least I hope it's because, there's a really good story here, and when you have that, you don't need a bunch of party tricks to fool the easily impressed. You just get to tell the story.
I actually think it's because whoever was working on this was just really good at it. I mean, I actually believe that Wondery was the distribution partner. I'm not like behind the scenes in this at all. I just think that the people working on this thing were the right people. And
that's all that matters.
I'm just going to stick with that. I mean, Toby, there is a narrative structure here that I was so impressed by, and I don't think we've heard something like it recently, which is that in the first couple of episodes, we follow the crime and the person who probably did it and probably should be in jail for it, as if that's kind of what happened. And we're like all in on that, right? And then we find out that's not what happened. I am just like incredibly impressed by the way that they structured this. I mean, I don't know how you feel about this podcast. We haven't talked about it a lot before taping the show because that's how we do this. I have just been assuming, and maybe I'm wrong, that you might be as impressed with the narrative structure of this as I am.
Yeah, well, I think, last week when we were talking about Firebug and we were talking about how it wasn't structured well and it sounded a little bit like an article and they didn't have the right focus and they left stuff to the end that should, but I feel like this one does it all just about perfectly. The way it's organized and the way it draws you in and the way you learn things is just about as good as I can imagine you doing it with this story. And I don't know if it's the exact first thing, but the bulk of the beginning of it is about this Halloween party that takes place at this apartment complex, which I kept thinking of as Melrose Place, but I'm sure it's not. And
it's down market Melrose Place, the way they describe it, yes.
They do this interesting thing where that in setting up this party and then talking about the party, you get to have a pretty good sense of a number of people who become players in this and what their relationships are. And you get to hear a lot of their voices. And you get to hear like the way that this woman, Arpana, who's the victim, her enthusiasm for the party, and you get a little bit of the background. And then the party itself the description, the way they talk about it was so reminiscent of things I've been to, you know, where there's a party and there's like one guy who's like being sort of hyper aggressive and freaking people out.
A dick.
Everybody wants him to get out of there. And
that's you, Toby.
Everything's kind of fun until about 1 o'clock in the morning. And then everybody's just like so wasted that it gets a little dark.
Parties have emotional lives of their own. Sounds weird to say that out loud, but I'm also guessing you kind of know what I mean. There are parties that are full of warmth, of happiness, parties where it feels like everyone is on the same wavelength. And then there are parties that have a bad mood to them, where you can feel something, anger, jealousy, barely concealed violence under the surface. That Halloween party in 2008, the Valley View Apartments, had started the first way and ended up the second.
So anyway, the structure is phenomenal, I thought.
Laura, I know you had party thoughts as well. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, no, I definitely, like Toby said, I mean, we've all been to a party like this at some point. And
Have we?
I have. Nobody got killed at the party I was at. But I mean, like, I think like there's Halloween parties, especially when you were in your younger years, they could always be adventurous. I mean, I had one at our sorority house where I was dressed up in this duck suit that I had. So I sort of became like this infamous character, the duck. And the children were coming to visit us to trick or treat. And I thought, I'll make it really spooky. And we had this like halogen lamp. And so I put a scarf over it, and you know how that ended. And the fire department came, and they said...
And that's how I met your mother.
That's your target market, the fire department.
Yeah, they said, who set the fire? And they said, the girl in the duck suit. And anyway, so I could really relate to this in a way, like that sort of period in life when you did, like Toby said, have these things where you're like, all these sort of rando people show up, and you're like, oh my God, who is that person that showed up in a duck suit? Or who is that person who did this? And I think... setting that up from the start, it's like not necessarily a whodunit, because who the heck knows? It was more of like this botched investigation story and how that played out. But setting it up the way they did with all these characters that came to this party, I think sort of started us on that story in such a way that we knew we weren't really going to, I didn't think I was going to know who done it.
Yeah, well, the party episode is really enthralling because just like in a murder mystery, like an Agatha Christie or a black and white Charlie Chan movie, you have this setting where everybody's there and you know, as a member of the audience, that you are going to be given things that are important, going to be important later on, so you are sizing up everything. Right? You hear all the people who are there, and you could kind of like trying to drink everything in, because something about is it this fight? Is it the beer? Is it what, you know, what is going to be important down the road? And I got to say, this is the closest thing to a game of Clue that we have heard, because it's the construction worker killed Little Red Riding Hood in the bathroom or the bed. You know, it's crazy like that.
You know what it is?
What?
It's only murders in the building.
It's only murders.
No, this
murders
is
in that
all I could think about. The theme song.
From Campside Media and Wondery, I'm Matthew Scher, and this is Suspect.
Has like this sort of evocative... Yes, I know it sounds a little bit serial-esque, but it actually has a very evocative... like mystery, and I know that this was made like way before Only the Murders in the Building was released. I know it, but it even has like a little bit of a concertina feel, but literally, and I'm not making light of this crime. I'm not. And by the way, Matt Scher is not making light of this crime. But this is a fucking great example of something that I have talked about so many times lately on this podcast, of a serious, important story where you can hear the joy in the making of it, right? This is somebody who clearly likes being a reporter and enjoyed putting the story together and understands how to put it together in a way that the audience will take it in. And it's very...
It makes us enthusiastic without him being thirsty about it.
Okay, here's a story where the victim lived in the building, the perpetrator was at a party, and one of the witnesses was there, and the killer was also there. It is literally Only Murders in the Building, right? It's the same setup.
I don't think you know what the word literally means, but I'll let it go.
It's the same setup. Yeah. Right? But what I was talking about earlier was that the structure, literally the first episode and the first two episodes, Cameron is laid out for us as the killer. We are given on a plate, Cameron is the killer. Emmanuel is a side story that is like quickly flash in the pan.
Until it isn't.
He was there.
Yeah.
I will say, and I am an astute observer of all details in every podcast. Emmanuel is like, oh, he was there. He left. In my mind, I was like, oh, that's probably important. This story is so well told. I literally forgot about him or almost forgot about him. Holy shit. Like I said to you, Kevin, wow, it's really weird that they're like giving us so much about this guy who probably did it. Like he's the guy. And you were like, just wait. I'm like, I forgot about Emmanuel. Laura, is that not a sign of a well-structured story that they could tell us about somebody who's so important and that as a listener, we could forget?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's very hard to do. I mean, this is something I've been working a lot on lately with like mystery writing. Like, okay, you don't want your suspect to be too obvious, but you want them to be there. So when they come out, everyone's like, oh. But I have to say, the Cameron thing, back to him, it was a good thing I was like walking in the woods by myself when we got to the part about how they just like gave him his BlackBerry back and like all this, like didn't even search it. And I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like, why? I'm like, oh, I looked around, I'm like, oh, no one else is here. Because he was set up as the killer, but he was set up as the killer in a way that was so much more plausible than Emmanuel. I just felt like Cameron, hello, he like fled to Canada. Oh, I just wanted to go for a drive to Canada. Yeah, okay. So when we then hear about blunder after blunder with how the investigation is handled from that point on, it was some rage-walking material right there.
Toby, one of the things that Matt Scher, the reporter, says at the beginning of the podcast, which I honestly thought was probably an overstatement, but turns out that it isn't, is that this is a rare story a reporter wants to tell, where it happened a long time ago, but everyone wants to talk about it. And you think, like, that can't possibly be true, right? Everyone wants to talk about it. He has all of the neighbors. He has the cops. He even has Neil, the dick at the party. He has the other neighbor who has like a murder board in his house. He has Emmanuel. He has literally everyone. Well, you're saying, Kevin, I don't know what literally
You're
means.
right, yeah.
But he does seem to have everyone.
He has all the important players.
He has the person
and they all wanted to talk.
He has the person who found the body, who avoided Arpana's dad's phone call, which, by the way, was a heartbreaking scene. What did you think, by the way, of just the access that Matt has and the fact that everybody seems to want to talk about this case?
Does he talk to Cameron?
I don't think we've heard any contemporary tape of Cameron through episode 5 yet.
Yeah, they've got good tape of him talking to cops. It's not too surprising that people want to talk about it, I would imagine, especially with, I guess we can spoil, but the fact that, you know, the person who got arrested for it didn't do it, I think, again, kind of makes you, if you're around that, want to talk more. But yeah, I again, like, I think the groundwork that's been done in getting all these interviews and then getting archival footage, like the phone call from the father, is just absolutely heartbreaking. There's a lot of good police questioning audio that they've got. I'm sure we'll talk about the audio that hits at the end of episode 5.
Oh my God.
Again, I mean, in some ways it's like, my God, like, how did they get this? How does this even exist to like shed light for us on this podcast? I think it's a good story. And I think it was interesting when the cops, there's just so many sort of evocative details about how the cops are getting these pictures. And at first, before they know people's names, they're like, oh yeah, you know, the vampire and the fireman and the construction worker. And that's how they're identifying these different people who are potentially suspects.
People, right?
Right, exactly. Before they can put names to them.
Find me Count Chocula.
So, yeah. And the way they play that is just like sort of perfectly done, where they play it for a minute, but they don't beat it to death or whatever. It's like a cool kind of interesting fact at one point, and then they kind of move on. I mean, it's just like praise after praise, I guess, which doesn't make for a very interesting comment, but it's just really well done.
It's really hard because there are so many details that, and I will admit, this is, I'm just going to ask you a question, Kevin, because I'm going to say something that I feel and then phrase it to as a question. You do not give me notes on it, so I'm going to ask you to respond. We have not listened to a true, legit, great true crime podcast that wasn't actually something else wrapped as a true crime podcast in a long time, right?
Right.
We've listened to a lot of great podcasts framed as a true crime podcast that were about other things, like Through the Cracks.
Well, wait a minute. Are you going to say this isn't? This is just a whoddunit? A great
This is
whodunit?
a true crime podcast.
It is.
Yeah, there's
It is.
procedural stuff, there's evidentiary stuff, there's stuff about forensics.
I'm not going to disagree with you that this is not a great true crime podcast. To say that there isn't another level here,
Yes.
remember, the word suspect is a
Yes.
noun,
Yes.
but it's also an adjective.
Yes.
And I think that that's what it's going
It's
at.
about an
We are
investigation.
going to get, we've only heard the
I
first
understand.
5. We're going to get to the science.
Yes.
And I think
It's
that's...
forensics. There's
Yeah.
a murder at the center. This is a murder podcast.
But it is, yes.
Yes, right? I would say this is a true crime podcast.
Are you asking me a question, or are you just...
I'm just saying.
Right? Did anyone hear a
Kevin,
question in that, or Rebecca just talking?
Kevin,
Yeah.
isn't there a difference
Uh-huh.
between... So a lot of people use the true crime podcast format to tell other kinds of stories, and there's nothing fucking wrong with that. I am not
Yes.
complaining.
Yeah.
Connie Walker, for instance, uses the true crime podcast format to tell socially important stories about missing Indigenous people through the true crime podcast format. Jonquilyn Hill used the true crime podcast format to tell stories about social issues and urban DC. This is a murder story, right? When is the last time we heard a great story told this well that is a murder story in a pure true crime podcast format? Can you remember?
It's not coming to me right now. But, that's what makes or breaks any true crime podcast is the source material.
Yeah.
Right? Is this an interesting enough event, an interesting enough crime? Is it compelling enough that it can hold up, the weight of 2 or 4 or 10 episodes, right? And this is because it is the most whodunit-ish whodunit that we have had in a really long time. You have a room full of suspects.
Yeah.
You quite literally have a room full of suspects. And then how it's told beyond that, it just, like you said, it gets revealed bit by bit.
It's
in
like
a
an
very
onion.
well-told way, like an onion, just like an onion. So the answer to your question is, yes, Rebecca, it's a great true crime podcast.
Well, I would say this is the thing, Toby, though, and this is the thing I've been thinking about you a lot about listening to this, is that the thing we think about a lot on this show is a lot of podcasts, like one of the bars to us liking them is they need to shine a light on something, right? And I know there is an evidentiary thing, a science thing here, like a jurisprudence thing here that this will shine a light on, right? We know that because this guy wrote this great article about touch DNA. So we know that this is coming. That being said, the narrative structure of this for me is enough for it to be very, very, very good. And that is, to me, rare. I don't know if you feel the same way, but that's how I am feeling at this point, even through episode 5.
Yeah, I guess, it's not an exact comparison, but it's sort of a podcast equivalent of In Cold Blood, in that I think it just works so well as what it is, in a way that others have tried and not quite succeeded at that level. But I think I wrote in a note to you that if I was going to be teaching like a class and like how to put together a really good podcast, like right now, I think I would use this. I mean, partly because, the crime is interesting and there's a whole lot of interesting things about it or whatever. They've got great tape or whatever, but you could still make a crappy podcast about this case, right?
So easily.
And I think, and I think we've certainly listened to podcasts that had more interesting cases that haven't been nearly as good as this. And I think it's just, it's craft, I think they figured out the best way to tell it. And that to me would make it stand out. And like you said, I'm sure there's going to be some stuff about the technology and things like that. But, I think the recommendation for this is just a really well-made, well-told story that, it's just a top example of the kind of thing that we listen to every week.
Lar, do you feel like there's tension between the two suspects that have been laid out for us? We've got Cameron, who is sus in many ways. Obviously, his DNA showed up on the oil can. He drove to Canada for no fucking reason. He has the phone calls to Arpana at 3 a.m.
He doesn't remember.
Quote, forgot. And he claims he heard the noises of her having sex / choking
Yeah, that having sex thing just didn't make sense.
whatever was going on. And he had the very, very suspect interviews. And then we have Emmanuel, who's...
Don't forget, he also can't remember if he kicked in the door.
Correct.
Couldn't remember.
And then then we have Emmanuel, who, by the way, his memory is immaculate. He's able to look at every photo from the party, identify everyone. One of the things that really strikes me about him, I mean, take the DNA stuff out of it, and he's so guileless. His memory is so pure. He's honest about all the stuff that even makes him look bad. And like, he's like, oh, that's Arpana. That's this. Oh yeah, I was there. I was helping her put her, sex worker stuff on Craigslist. Yeah, that's why I was there. That's
lady. Yeah, that was bizarro.
So like when you weigh these two, I mean, do you think it's interesting that we have two people who are so clearly in the frame? I mean, it makes it more for a compelling story, right?
Well, it does. And I think, having two people in the frame and then having Emmanuel in the frame and sort of looking at this as perhaps maybe like not necessarily like, I know we were talking about it being a whodunit, but more like a study of a botched investigation and looking at like racial and economic factors that might have played a role in how this all played out, especially when this like crapshoot DNA thing comes into the picture. I think it's really kind of a study in how an investigation can just go wrong based on certain stereotypes. And in this case, science that we now know isn't necessarily the big be all that we thought it might be at one point. But I did feel like, I guess for me, I felt the tension because I felt so strongly that Cameron seemed really guilty. I mean, everything he said to me, I'm like the whole like, well, why would it sound like she was like choking when she was having sex? Like, really? And there was just some weird things he said that didn't add up. But then when you hear that jail tape of Emmanuel talking about how he's basically been railroaded and needs an attorney, like the contrast between those two suspects to me was like night and day.
I need to get a lawyer or something, man. You do. You're going to have to, so I don't know. You need a fucking lawyer.
That end of episode 5 was an extraordinary piece of audio, and I've never heard a podcast use tape from a subject used for the next up on. They just use Emmanuel's jail phone call and say, next up.
You mean natural
suspect.
sound tape?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's just like, I've been railroaded. Next up on suspect.
And I need to get a good one because these motherfuckers is going to try to railroad a motherfucker, man.
That's on the next episode of Suspect.
They don't want you out. Ever.
I thought that was just such a beautifully constructed cliffhanger. I've never heard anything like it before. Toby, you sent me a note about that as well.
Yeah, it's kind of a stopper. I was driving and it's just like, oh my God. Like you're not expecting it. It packs a punch. And then you're like, wait, what day does this come out? The next episode?
I mean, listen, I recommended this podcast.
Sign me up for Wondery Plus immediately.
I recommended this podcast to so many people. I have gotten 4 people who hate Wondery to sign up for Wondery Plus. I have once again signed up for the free trial of Amazon Music.
Oh,
it's been a whole thing. Kevin, what did you think of just the end of episode 5? Did you like it as much as I did with the jail sound sort of like cliffhanger situation?
No, I hated it because I wanted to listen to episode 6. I was mad. The actual fuck, Matt. Don't do me like that.
Where are you on the Cameron Emmanuel thing? I'm curious.
Well, I mean, I can't say who I think the killer is, but I would say if I were a cop, I'd keep my eye on Cameron.
You mean if you were a cop in 2008 or if you were a cop right now?
Both.
Because we have you Googled? Because I haven't. I
had to Google because of spelling and whatnot. So now I know. Yeah.
I had to Google and I was like, okay, my feelings were correct.
I have stayed very far away from the Google on this. I cannot. I have been pure. I cannot.
That's something for you. You do not. You will immediately.
Very rare for me. Very, very rare. I want to stay pure and I want to stay like arm's length from this. All right. I think we should do what we do. Let's let our listeners know, if we haven't yet, should they check out the podcast Suspect?
What do you think we're going to say?
From Campside Media. I want to say from Wondery too, but I really think it's from Campside. I think Wondery is a distribution partner. Should they check out the new podcast Suspect? Laura Bricker, what do you think? Thumbs up or thumbs up? for Suspect.
I'm going to tell you, it is a huge thumbs up. And unlike you guys, I do have the Amazon Music because the teenager in my house signed us up and I just never canceled. So I will say that my normal 2.5 mile walk this week was going to about 4 miles because I wanted to keep listening, which is a good thing. So thank you, Wondery. This was just a really interesting case. It was told in such a way that details were released at just the right time to keep you listening. And it's also a case that I think as we continue listening, we're going to see, has some bigger picture issues with regard to criminal justice and investigations. But right now, it's just a really good story.
Toby Ball.
Yeah, I so far, so great, I think. I mean, it's just really put together well. It's hard for me to picture what I would do differently with what they've done so far. You're always a little bit nervous, throwing praise like this, and are they going to be able to land the plane? But their decision making up until this point has been so spot on that I assume that they've got it figured out. So yeah, a big thumbs up, and hopefully if it continues in this vein, it'll be another one that kind of goes on the short list of recommendations for people when they're like, what should I listen to if I want to get into true crime podcasts?
Kevin Flynn.
Yeah, I'm a big thumbs up. By the way, if you have Prime, you may already have one of the levels of Amazon Music. There's some higher levels where you get more songs and whatnot. But if you have Prime, check. You might have it already, and so what you can get the. You don't have to
get the free trial for 30 days, like I keep doing over and over again.
Eventually you don't want to double pay for it. And look, in any event, thumbs up. I just thought that this was put together extremely well. I did not want these episodes to end. It's a really interesting crime. It couldn't have been told any better with the raw material it was given. And I do know the direction the case goes in from here, and I'm excited to listen to how they wrap it all up.
All right. So I'm going to do an unprecedented thing I've never done on the podcast before.
Thumb sideways?
I'm going to give it 2 thumbs up.
Okay.
Only because I am looking at our past reviews from... I'm scrolling through the Crime Writers On back catalog right now in my podcast app. I cannot find even the last podcast that we did that was a pure true crime, straight up murder podcast that didn't have another agenda that it was also trying to do, right? And it really, at least in the last year or two, that was great. We've done other murder podcasts, but not one that was great. This podcast is great. This podcast is in terms of narrative storytelling, it's serial great. It is great. It is structurally great. It is narrative great. It is production great. It is so freaking good. It is addictive. It is giving you all of the case information. It is giving you just enough of the contextual information. It's doing all of the right things in terms of giving you the background about how a person of color is different than a white suspect in an efficient way without making a left turn and making the podcast about something that it isn't about. It's doing everything exactly right. The music is used right. The sources are used right. It is just freaking impeccable and addictive, and I love it. 2 huge thumbs up for Suspect for me. I can't say enough good things about this podcast. I recommended it to about 150 people in the last few days. Granted, I listened through episode 5. I have a few more episodes to go. If I am disappointed in the next few, I will say it on next week's podcast. I seriously doubt that's going to happen based on what I've heard so far. I love everything about this podcast so far. 2 huge thumbs up for me.
Whether you're a diehard sports fan, a hopeless romantic, or a comedy aficionado, the Xfinity 10G network was made for streaming it all. Worry less about buffering when streaming your favorite shows, movies, or live sports, and enjoy a better way to watch. Xfinity gives you a reliable connection for streaming, plus all the entertainment you love all in one place. Fear not, because now you can finally sit back, relax, and stream your favorite entertainment and sports like never before with the Xfinity 10G network.
Want the same expert advice you get from the pros in the store while shopping online at DiscountTire.com? Meet Treadwell, your personal online tire guide that matches you with the perfect tire for your vehicle. Get your best match in 1 minute or less with Treadwell by Discount Tire.
Ready to pop the question? The jewelers at BlueNile.com have got sparkle down to a science with beautiful lab-grown diamonds worthy of your most brilliant moments. Their lab-grown diamonds are independently graded and guaranteed identical to natural diamonds, and they're ready to ship to your door. Go to BlueNile.com and use promo code WELCOME to get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more. That's code WELCOME at BlueNile.com for $50 off. BlueNile.com.
Now it's time for my favorite part of the podcast, a little something I like to call the crime of
the week.
One vineyard in Portugal has found a way to promote nature while picking grapes. When the summer temperatures get hot, they allow nudists to come and harvest the crop. Members of the Portuguese Federation of Naturism descended on Grandola to get some sun while participating in a fun group activity that for once wasn't volleyball. The members spread out among the vines in only shoes and sun caps to cull the ripest fruit fit for bottles of vino. It was the first such nude harvest.
And why do you say nude?
It's funny. And the participants say they'll do it again. They just have to be very careful what they do with the pruning shears. Panel, what is the name of the wine this vineyard will be releasing? Laura Bricker, what do you think?
Well, I'm in a wine club now. So I actually have an idea. Yeah, I joined this wine club in town once a month. So I'm going to say that this would be called the Birthday Suit Bordeaux.
Not bad. Not bad. Toby Ball, what do you think?
I was like the short and curly Shiraz.
Not bad. Not bad. Kevin Flynn, what do you think?
Pinot Noir.
Not bad at all. Can't top that. We should probably end it on that, though. Before we do, Laura Bricker, do we have a cat of the week this week?
We have a dog this week. Hold on, I got to pull it up again. And this comes from our longtime listener, Connie Molinaro.
Hey, Connie.
Hi, Connie.
Connie's 19-year-old son, Colby, was helping out an amputee horsewoman drive to Tennessee to deliver some goats and chickens. He helps on her farm. On the way back at a truck stop, a guy was sitting on his tailgate and had a little dog with him, and he was looking for a home for her. Well, Colby loves dogs. They already have 2. He went up and she leapt into his arms, and that sealed the deal. The man told him he was out of work, hungry, and couldn't keep the dog and needed to find it a good home. All he wanted was money for the crate. So Colby went in to the truck stop, got the $20, and took home the dog, who is now named Sweet Annie after a Zac Brown Band song. And she's very cute. And I just thought that was so nice.
It is nice. Anytime a dog gets moved from one circumstance to a better circumstance, it's always nice. Mm-hmm. All right, Laura Bricker, if folks want to send their animals to you to be cat, dog, emu, llama, or otherwise a pet of the week, how can they find you on Twitter?
At Laura Bricker.
And of course, you can always email us at crimewriterson@gmail.com or send us a note at our Facebook group. That's how we get most of our pets of the week. Toby Ball, if folks want to reach out to you on Twitter, how can they find you?
At Toby Ball NH.
And Kevin P. Flynn, how can folks reach out to you?
At Kevin P. Flynn.
That's right. And if you want to follow me
The P is for Pinot Noir.
And if you want to follow me on Twitter or Instagram, you can find me at Reb Lavoie. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Crime Writers On, and I encourage you to join our amazing and inclusive community in our official Crime Writers On Facebook discussion group. You can find it at Crime Writers On Facebook, and then just hit join the group. We'll let you in if you're nice. Support the show at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia. You'll get the Crime Writers On After Show, Married with Podcast, Laura Bricker's Leave It to Bricker podcast, and Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcast. By the way, you should also sign up for our free newsletter, right? How do you do that, Kevin?
Go to crimewriterson.com. It's right at the top of the page.
It's free and it's awesome.
Yep.
Our theme song was composed and performed by Ty Gibbons. Our line editor is the handsome and astute Olivia Burdett. The executive producer of this program is Kevin Flynn. This show is recorded in the Yoga Loft above the Bodega in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi studio, otherwise known as Studio C, the closet in our New Hampshire basement where we go every time we're turned away at the Canadian border. On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you later.
I have pork smelly burps.
It's so bad.
That's awesome.
What'd you have for dinner?
Pork.
He made some pork on the grill. It's
No
so
pork.
bad. It literally smells like dog food every time he burps.
Oh, gross.
I had pulled pork.
Oh.
It's a lot of...
So did John of God.
Yeah.
Partners in Crime Media.
Want the same expert advice you get from the pros in the store while shopping online at DiscountTire.com? Meet Treadwell, your personal online tire guide that matches you with the perfect tire for your vehicle. Get your best match in 1 minute or less with Treadwell by Discount Tire.